In this short presentation, we'll think a little bit about the way that Shakespeare's plays have been presented to the audience. Today, we often think about Shakespeare's plays in these sanitized versions that appear on bookstore shelves, online, the kinds of things where you buy the text and you've got nice, neat little introductions, helpful notes, good glosses, etc. Some modern editions even claim to be in, quote, plain English, or in modern English, something we know that Shakespeare himself was already writing in. Imagine for a moment, though, that it's late in the year of 1597, and that you are a visitor to London from the country or from abroad, someone who's recently seen a play by that popular new playwright, William Shakespeare. You were so taken by the play's sharp characterizations and apt figures that you'd like now to reflect on the printed text at your leisure. In order to obtain a copy, you'd have to find your way to the bookstalls located in the heart of the city near St. Paul's Cathedral. What with the crowd and the confusion, you'd have quite a time pushing your way up to the bookstalls that lined Paternosters Row, which ran along the north side of the cathedral and still exist in some form today. If you could finally get to the stalls, though, your eye might be caught by the 1597 title page of Romeo and Juliet, which promised an excellent conceited tragedy. In contrast to modern editions, with their long introductions and notes, the Elizabethan edition consisted of a title page and approximately 50 pages of text. If Romeo and Juliet wasn't up to your speed or didn't catch your eye, there were plenty of other texts to choose from. The authors of English Renaissance plays were among the first professional writers in English letters, writing individually in collaboration and receiving on average about £6. They produced approximately 900 plays during the period between 1590 and 1642. One playwright alone, Thomas Heywood, claimed to have, quote, either an entire hand or at least a main finger in 220 plays. The Master of Revels held a pretty important role throughout Shakespeare's life and into the early 17th century, being the one person who would approve or disapprove of a play and whether or not it could actually be performed. But as you study the play, it might be helpful for you to know how they were composed. Typically, Renaissance dramatists began with a plot of their play, a preliminary outline of the sequence of scenes. From that, they progressed to a rough draft called foul papers of the whole play. We have, for example, the manuscript of the play on the left called The Book of Sir Thomas More. You can notice the number of deletions and corrections that were made by the playwright. The next version of the play, the prompt book, used to prompt actors who had forgotten their lines, was sometimes produced in the manuscript itself and sometimes from a scribe's clean copy. In addition to the author's stage directions, prompters added to their own directions to the prompt copy. Frequently, these directions were anticipatory in nature, that is, instructions to have an actor enter sometime before he speaks his first lines, or to have certain props set out just before they would be needed. It was the prompt book that the official censor actually approved. The text would have to be brought down to the Stationer's Register, buildings still exist today in London, and be approved by the Master of Revels, who licensed plays for performance, and then the Stationer's Register, who actually approved the printing of the plays. Because the smaller quarto edition was a good deal less expensive to produce than the larger folio, plays were usually first published in quarto form. Some quarto versions of the plays were actually stolen from the theatrical company that owned them, pirated, most scholars now think, by disaffected actors who had memorized the lines. Other quarto versions of the plays that we used to think were pirated because of their differences from other versions, we now suspect were performance versions, some possibly used by the company when it was on the road. More expensive folio editions were most often used for collected editions of the plays. Many scholars now agree that we have not one version of King Lear, but actually two, an earlier version published in quarto and a later revised one in the folio. The later version lacks some 285 lines found in the quarto, and the quarto edition contains another 115 not found there. About a year ago, Sotheby's auctioned off a very rare complete first folio of Shakespeare. There are very few of these copies that still are in existence, and the auction price went for over $500,000. That brings us to our edition of Shakespeare, which we'll talk a great deal about. The Norton Shakespeare, which is based on the Oxford edition and uses some of the most definitive and authoritative copies of the texts that are available. Now it's time for you to think a little bit on this question. Given this presentation and our class discussions, in a few pages, discuss what you think the reception of Romeo and Juliet would have been in the late 1590s. The play was almost immediately popular. What do you think the reader or audience responded to?